But yeah, for a pregame show, let's see. It's actually been a bigger week for doing things and reading things than what feels like normal. Continuing piece by piece to work on Andrea Falconeri's Il Primo Libro, bunch of Renaissance music that he's got in one folio. What's this one called that I'm working on? Brando di Abril Tipla A3. And if somebody pronounces Italian, they will surely best me on that. But this is these are my notes as I write it out. There's a cat chomping on that one as I write it out. And this is today's work. You can see that there, which is a problem that I've been kind of working on in the back of my head in terms of how to fill space in between two notes that were fairly dead, and there's a second voice in the song that can kind of be brought up into that. Kind of solved that, and I feel good about that. And the rest of today's victory is just getting the next notes on my own hand-drafted copy, and some days that's the gain you're happy with. So that's quite good. And let's see. This, which I received for Christmas, continuing to read through, and reread through, actually, Zen and the Art of Guitar, which is a lovely, lovely volume, and has much that applies to both music and other endeavors as well, specifically when it gets to the section on jamming and working with groups in a kind of collaborative, creative energy effort. And I got this in the mail, which I'm very excited about. I did a search for Perpetua Discordia. Perpetua Discordia is it's a principle in old Greco-Roman naturalism that describes a relationship that is in perpetual conflict and that will never resolve. The specific example of that are elephants and dragons, which if you look into that, you will find that elephants and dragons have eternal animosity toward each other. They will never forgive, they will never forget, and by God, someone's going down. And to the extent that they both resent each other, they also abhor each other. So they invite combat, they repel each other. Anyway, so I was looking into this to try to remember a little bit more of this than was coming to mind, and this came up: Principia Discordia by Malaclips the Younger, and this is a kind of sort of postmodern, quasi-religious tract that is, religious is probably the wrong word, metaphysical. It's fairly chaotic and has a touch of, quality 60s, 70s conspiracy theory thrown in, and I'm very eager to jump into this. It's fascinating stuff. Penned by Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. And Omar Khayyam, I assume, is, if not a tribute to the author of the Rubaiyat by the author, then a tribute to the author of the Rubaiyat by his parents. And the big thing this week, I have I binged all of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, the 70s ones, some time ago, and decided to sort of jump on and see what the original manga source is like. So I have the great fortune of finding the 1987 translations by, who is this, First Publishing? One of these very early groups that are bringing Japanese media material into an English language audience. And it's got introductions here by Frank Miller in there, and it's really interesting because there are several words that are now fairly common, especially among people who would sort of be, your direct target audience for this sort of thing. Words like Ronin and Sake and actually those are two, and tofu. These are words that at the time of this printing are obscure enough to merit footnotes, and so it's a really neat snapshot of a cultural moment in terms of this material, Japanese media's penetration into sort of casual Western and probably primarily for this publication American circulation. So that's neat. But the thing that I want to bring up, which is one of the reasons why I am hooked on this, because the paneling style in this manga is fantastic, and I actually have a very hard time getting into manga. I find much of the style a little more frenetic, and it's a little it demands a lot. I find, and I can make exceptions for that with things like Otomo's Akira and other things like that. But I can sit down with the volume of Akira at 11 p.m. and be awake at 3 a.m. because it's so stimulating. It's so active and busy. So it's kind of a deliberate choice to sort of jump into one of these things. But this is why I'm into Lone Wolf and Cub, and let me pull up this. There we go. So it uses filmic transitions in its panels in a way that is particularly fascinating. I'm going to give you an illustration of what that means here. So in this instance, this is Ito Ogami. Ito Ogami is the main character, and he is having a fever dream. He is passed out in a temple, and these are the nightmares that he's having. It's sort of a hellscape, rivers of the dead, fires, etc. And there, as the mist, and one might assume the spume of blood, sort of clears out, he finds demons bearing down on him through this ether. And he fights them, he battles them. It's a noble effort, but his sword breaks. He's completely defenseless. They mock him clearly as they're about to destroy him. And then this scene fades. The demonic here fades into the daily, and you find that these are maybe little Wizard of Oz like. These are versions of the banal, the normal, the ordinary on the outside of the temple. And so Ogami awakens and sort of checks his head, and he's like, I have to go find my son. And so he picks up his sword, but he's still very sick. So he falls on his sword, not in the Roman sense, but in the sense as you see here. And then this bottom panel is fascinating. It's fascinating because you see his silhouette, almost ghostly, ethereal, but still slightly substantial as the background changes. And, that structure that you're seeing there at the very bottom, that hut, that almost looks rendered there in the background. It's as if it's being pulled, as if he's being pulled away in spirit. But then it doesn't follow through on that. It is not an out-of-body experience for him. It is actually a full-on change in scene and location for this story and the story that it's telling. And I want to zoom in on those panels in particular because I flip back and forth between these things for like 10 minutes, just my mind being blown at how effective this is at creating a sort of a dreamlike state and a dreamlike transition in a story that itself is not Lynchian, it's not Silent Hill, it's not that sort of dreamlike experience, but it includes that as a way of binding the stories of the father and the son together. So here, there he is. He's fallen down. He's propping himself up on his sword in its sheath, and then it cuts to the what's the word I'm looking for? Farm, natural countryside. That's it. The countryside scene as he is sort of ghostly, and then it goes straight into these very normal particulars. And if you were to approach this scene right here, like this right here, just this panel, as the terminal point, the end point of, let's go back, the end point of this, you would assume that maybe he's teleporting, maybe he is dreaming this, maybe he is entering into some other state. There is something ghostly about him because he is still substantial, and he still has a proportionality. He's still proportionate to the new setting. And so you might assume that there's something something about him that is transforming, but that's not what's followed through on. What's followed through on is this. And if you were to assume that this image here is the starting point, just ignore that this exists at all. If this image right here is the starting point of whatever this is, you've got a scene that is very far out. You've got a tree there. You've got a house in the background. And so one might assume that there is a zoom in on the particular of this branch, and then it zooms in on a particular of the house. And so this shot right here, there's something mysterious about a ghostly figure being there. Is this some haunting? But clearly clearly that ghostly figure is secondary to whatever the narrative is here. And the fact that those two things are overlapped with each other, and there is not the kind of very clear, explicit meaning that that this is his dream or that he teleports or something, but that is simply a transition that is made. That is fascinating to me. That is fascinating. That is a great. That is an awesome storytelling approach using something which is filmic, because if you look at, I mean, I assume that if you view this as a filmic influence, this is just a fade transition, right? This is where you have one scene, it fades out, another scene fades on top, which we've seen a million times, and that influence, that visualization, I highly suspect that this probably would not exist as a panel if that film technique didn't exist, right? There's a reference here that we're familiar with, and yeah, so it's a technique that looks very normal in the medium that it comes from. But then when it's taken out of that medium, when it's taken out of film and it's used in a comic panel like this, it attains a completely different kind of feeling. It is using the vocabulary of one and the language of another, as a manner of speaking. And it succeeds wildly. It's very strange. It's very strange. And so yeah, so anyway, that's pregame show. That's what I've been looking at, and now we can go on to Elden Ring.